It's bad enough that they let Roy Boehm become a U.S. Navy officer. Now someone had the bright idea to let this enlisted smart aleck run his own unit. The cocky lieutenant thinks he can take America's regular frogmen and turn them into some kind of all-rounder special ops force. Sailors, soldiers, spies, and saboteurs all rolled into one. To make matters worse, he thinks he can play by his own rules, modifying diving gear without permission, and even buying AR-15s on the open market. Now the Navy brass wants to shut his unit down before it's even done training. But President Kennedy is prepared to give Boehm and his so-called Navy SEALs one last chance, if they can make it back from a daring mission into Castro's Cuba. Roy Boehm was born on April 9, 1924, in a tough working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. His father was a World War I veteran. As a boy, Roy's mother would tell him, quote, "You're just like your father. You're a real hellraiser. You'll either grow up to be a hero, or you'll end up dead or in prison. There is no middle way for the Boehm men." Growing up in a poor family during the Great Depression meant Roy experienced firsthand the harsh realities that shaped an entire generation. Yet despite the tough circumstances surrounding him, Roy harbored a deep fascination with the ocean. He spent countless hours exploring Brooklyn's waterfronts, watching ships come and go, dreaming of adventures beyond the horizon. His parents had also instilled in him a great sense of patriotism. He became an avid reader of books about American military history and naval tradition. In 1939, as storm clouds gathered across Europe and tensions rose across the Pacific, the 15-year-old Boehm could see which way the wind was blowing and wanted to make sure he would get a piece of the action. He later said, quote, "I was afraid the war would begin and end before I was old enough to participate." So when his parents announced they were getting a divorce in January 1941 and asked young Roy which of them he would live with, he told them he wouldn't live with either of them because he was going to join the Navy instead. On April 10th, the day after his 17th birthday, he walked into a recruiting office and enlisted. 8 months later, the attack on Pearl Harbor finally brought the U.S. into the global conflict. Boehm's childhood dreams of maritime adventure were about to become a reality, more intense and dangerous than anything he could have imagined. After completing basic training at Norfolk, Virginia, Boehm's first assignment was aboard the submarine tender USS Griffin, followed by the repair ship USS Alcor. By April 1942, 18-year-old Roy Boehm found himself aboard the newly commissioned destroyer USS Duncan at Pearl Harbor, where he would get his first glimpse of war's devastation. The harbor still bore the scars of the December 7th attack: twisted metal, oil slicks, and the ghostly outline of sunken battleships beneath the murky water. As a qualified diver, Boehm was temporarily assigned to the base salvage operations and was given the rather gruesome task of recovering bodies and ammunition from the tomb of the USS Arizona. He figured he could handle it and was determined to look tough in front of his shipmates. Describing the culture on board Duncan, he later said, quote, "Macho was the order of the day." 30 feet below the surface, Arizona lay majestically intact but mortally wounded. Clouds of fish swarmed the ship, parting like wind through wheat as Boehm descended, while a variety of debris, lines, canvas, netting, clung to the vessel's hull. Boehm and his dive partner slipped inside the ship's dark compartments. Using their underwater torches, they could see illuminated watertight hatches hanging half open and bits of wreckage floating spookily in gangways. Boehm unclogged a closed hatch and entered the compartment beyond. He recalled, quote, "Our entry stirred the water and disturbed the haunted rest of several corpses. They moved about in a kind of weird slow-motion dance." As he flashed his light around, he began to see the deceased sailors in more detail. Recoiling in horror, Boehm hit his head on the steel hatch, leaving him momentarily stunned. He'd had enough. He explained, quote, "I shot out of the macabre tomb like a squid, my partner directly behind me, while my stomach deposited its contents into my mask. I no longer felt as damned macho, but with my poor young heart pounding like bombs." Fortunately for Boehm, it would be his last dive into an underwater graveyard. USS Duncan received orders to set sail the next day. By October 1942, Duncan and Boehm were bound for the Solomon Islands, where U.S. forces were locked in a desperate struggle with the Japanese for control of Guadalcanal. What awaited them would be one of the largest all-surface naval engagements of World War II. the Battle of Cape Esperance. On the night of October 11th, Boehm and his shipmates were sent to battle stations. He later described his reaction, quote, "Word spread that the Japanese ships were only 110 miles away. I felt vicious little animals with teeth and claws writhing inside my guts. Would I react in a manner that would bring honor to those who depended on me?" Before long, the battle had begun. Japanese shells rained down on Duncan quickly and mercilessly. 58 direct hits from 6-inch and 8-inch guns tore through the destroyer's hull and superstructure. Metal fragments flew like confetti as the ship's deck plates buckled and twisted. Boehm felt shrapnel embed itself in his head and body, but adrenaline kept him moving. As Duncan began tilting into the waves, he spotted a wounded shipmate, Seaman Second Class Stanley Dubiel, lying unconscious outside the vessel's powder room, which was engulfed in flames. Despite the imminent danger, Boehm rushed toward the passed-out Dubiel, secured his life jacket, and threw him into the sea, giving him a precious lifeline. Though he did not have a life jacket himself, Boehm then jumped into the water too. However, as he grabbed onto a floating piece of debris, he suddenly realized there was a Japanese sailor clinging to the other end of it. Frozen with fear, the two men locked eyes, each waiting for the other to attack. When they realized that neither of them had any great desire to fight one another in the middle of the sea, they both swam off in opposite directions. As Boehm desperately tried to avoid being hit by the sinking Duncan, which was steaming in a tight circle, he bumped into Dubiel, now conscious and delirious with pain. Holding on to his wounded comrade tightly, Boehm began swimming as fast as he could to get them both out of the danger zone. Soon enough, the guns had fallen silent, the flaming Duncan barely visible in the distance. Boehm wondered if he and Dubiel were the only two survivors. Through the darkness, he could make out a faraway shape that he believed to be Savo Island and swam toward it, pulling his shipmate along with him. He recalled, quote, "Salt water had swollen my face. My eyes felt like they were dipped in acid. My vision was blurred. My tongue felt like a dry sea cucumber stuffed down my throat. I feared it would block my windpipe." Yet suddenly, the two men found themselves facing an unexpected threat, worse than any enemy vessel. Emerging from the waves were 4 or 5 dark shark fins, rapidly drawing nearer. Boehm reached for his knife, but it had been lost at sea. All he could do was keep swimming and hope for the best. But it was too late. Boehm could only watch helplessly as the largest shark tore Dubiel from his grasp. The man's screams cut short as he disappeared beneath the dark waters. Boehm was distraught and certain he was next. He recalled, quote, "I lost all control. I beat the water frantically with arms and legs as I swam with renewed desperation, knowing deep down I could never outswim sharks, but determined to make them work for their supper." Miraculously, after taking Dubiel, the sharks did not follow Boehm. Eventually, he was found by a U.S. Marine rescue boat and taken to safety, but the incident would give him nightmares for years to come. After surviving USS Duncan's sinking, Boehm continued his Pacific War service aboard several ships, participating in major campaigns, including the Battle of the Coral Sea, Bougainville, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. He supplied arms and ammunition to Filipino guerrillas and fought the Japanese at Kuramaretto and Okinawa. By war's end in 1945, the young sailor from Brooklyn boasted an impressive combat record. Like many servicemen, Boehm briefly left the Navy after the war, but civilian life didn't suit him. He reflected, quote, "Had World War II and nearly 4 years of combat action turned me into an adrenaline junkie. Had I reached the point, in fact, where I preferred war over boredom." After just a few months, he re-enlisted in June 1947. The military had become his home, his identity, his calling. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, Boehm found himself back in combat aboard the light cruiser USS Worcester. As chief boatswain's mate, he provided crucial fire support for the Marine Corps landing at Incheon, one of the war's most daring amphibious assaults. Later, when Chinese forces pushed Allied troops back in a desperate retreat, Boehm and the Worcester covered the withdrawal to the chosen reservoir, their guns blazing through the frozen hell of the Korean winter. The Korean conflict reinforced what Boehm had learned in the Pacific. Conventional warfare had its limits. He watched Marines struggle in brutal mountain terrain, saw how traditional tactics failed against guerrilla fighters, observed how small, specialized units could achieve what larger forces could not. These observations were planting seeds in his mind, ideas about a different kind of naval warrior, one who could adapt to any environment and mission. By 1955, at age 31, Boehm made a decision that would change his life and ultimately revolutionize naval special operations. He applied for underwater demolition team training at Little Creek, Virginia. Most UDT hopefuls were in their early 20s, but Boehm's extensive diving experience from his Pearl Harbor days and years of combat leadership made him an ideal candidate despite his age. The UDT training was brutal by design. The men were pushed beyond their physical and mental limits, forced to operate in freezing water for hours, swim impossible distances, and conduct beach reconnaissance under simulated combat conditions. Yet while many quit, Boehm thrived. Where younger trainees struggled with deep water operations and equipment malfunctions, Boehm moved through the water with practiced ease. During combat exercises, many would panic under pressure, but Boehm had already survived real enemy fire. The stress inoculation of actual warfare made training scenarios seem manageable by comparison. After completing UDT training, Boehm's unique background caught the attention of Navy researchers. His combination of deep-sea diving expertise and combat experience made him perfect for testing prototype submersibles and swimmer delivery vehicles. This cutting-edge work exposed him to the latest developments in underwater warfare technology. But Boehm's vision was expanding beyond traditional UDT missions. The Frogmen were experts at beach reconnaissance and underwater demolition, but he saw the potential for something more. His experiences in 2 wars had shown him the limitations of conventional forces. What if elite naval operators could work beyond the beachhead, conducting missions that combined the best of different military specialties? These ideas were still forming as Boehm earned his officer's commission. The Navy recognized his leadership potential, promoting him from the enlisted ranks, a Mustang officer who had earned his position through merit rather than academy credentials. By the late 1950s, Lieutenant Boehm's unique combination of combat experience, diving expertise, and innovative thinking had positioned him for something extraordinary. In early 1960, Boehm received orders that would change naval warfare forever. Develop, design, and implement the U.S. Navy's first commando organization. The unit would be called SEALs, an acronym for Sea, Air, and Land Operations. 2 teams were created, one to be based on the East Coast and one on the West. Boehm was given command of the East Coast team, which would be the first to receive orders. He had become the first Navy SEAL. More than just frogmen, he envisioned highly motivated operatives who could function in any environment. What he himself described as, quote, unconventional warriors for unconventional times. Boehm began putting his team together, selecting men who possessed not just physical prowess, but mental toughness and adaptability. He set about creating a training program unlike anything the military had ever seen. His SEALs would need a range of skills rarely seen in traditional roles. As well as diving, shooting, demolitions, martial arts, and parachuting, Boehm's men learned photography and intelligence gathering, crucial in reconnaissance missions. They also had to master sailing, understanding that a silent approach by boat might be their only way to reach a target undetected. Somewhat controversially, he even began sending SEALs to prisons to learn from professional thieves. Lockpicking, safecracking, hot wiring cars. These weren't skills taught at Annapolis or any conventional military school. Yet Boehm understood that his warriors might need to break into enemy facilities, steal vehicles, or bypass security systems that criminals had been defeating for decades. But building an elite unit required more than highly trained personnel. It needed the right tools. However, this would start a series of problems between Boehm and the Navy. Standard issue equipment was inadequate for the missions he envisioned. He wanted improved high-altitude parachutes. He wanted AR-15 rifles instead of standard issue weapons. On one occasion, Boehm got in an argument with a Navy engineer who had ignored his request for better diving rigs and purchased a model that the SEALs testing had shown to be useless for their missions. The discussion became so heated that Boehm threw the fully clothed, non-swimming engineer into his training pool just to make a point, telling him, quote, "You, sir, would be a far better engineer if you learned how to swim." Navy bureaucrats were horrified. Military protocol demanded that any changes to equipment go through proper channels, a process that could take months or years. Boehm didn't have that luxury. His unit needed to be operational quickly, and he wasn't about to let red tape compromise his men's effectiveness or safety. So he did what any good commander would do. He improvised. Boehm began modifying issued gear without authorization and purchasing weapons on the open market. His longtime friend, author John Wiseman, later explained, quote, "The Navy establishment considered Roy a rogue and a pariah because despite his lieutenant's railroad tracks, he was always a boatswain's mate at heart. A feisty, pugnacious, brawling, ham-fisted, hard-drinking fleet sailor whose devotion to his shipmates superseded all other loyalties. But what he was doing now was tantamount to insubordination." The backlash was swift and severe. Boehm faced 5 separate Board of Inquiry proceedings for his unorthodox methods. Each investigation threatened to end his career and dissolve the SEAL program before it truly began. But as 1960 turned to 61, the political landscape was changing. A new president was taking office, one who understood that America needed innovative approaches to warfare. The bureaucratic storm surrounding Boehm's methods was about to encounter a very different kind of leadership at the highest levels of government. Soon after his inauguration, President John F. Kennedy made Special Forces a cornerstone of his military strategy. The Bay of Pigs fiasco of April 1961, in which a U.S.-backed attempt to take back Cuba from Fidel Castro's communists ended in disaster, demonstrated the need for elite units capable of unconventional warfare. Kennedy understood that the Cold War would be fought in shadows, requiring warriors who could operate beyond the reach of traditional military forces. When word reached the White House about Boehm's embattled SEAL program, Kennedy was intrigued. Here was exactly the kind of innovative thinking his administration needed. But first, the president wanted to see these warriors in action. Kennedy arranged a visit to the Little Creek training area in Virginia. What he witnessed was unlike anything in the conventional Navy. Boehm's SEALs demonstrated capabilities that seemed to blur the lines between science fiction and reality. They emerged from the water like sea creatures, struck targets with precision that defied belief, and disappeared back into their element as silently as they had come. The president was impressed, but Boehm's bureaucratic troubles remained. He still had 5 Board of Inquiry investigations against him. Navy traditionalists argued that military discipline demanded adherence to proper channels, regardless of mission requirements. Kennedy saw the situation differently. The Soviet Union wasn't going to wait for American bureaucracy to approve the right equipment. Communist insurgents weren't bound by procurement regulations. If the United States was going to compete in this new kind of warfare, it needed leaders willing to break rules in service of a higher mission. In early 1962, the president called Boehm to Washington to brief him on the progress of the Navy's new commando unit. When Kennedy walked into the briefing room, Boehm's first words were characteristically blunt, quote, "Well, Mr. President, I didn't vote for you, but I'd die for you." After a long pause, Kennedy replied, quote, "Well, we need more guys like that." In the meeting, the president told Boehm he would be issued a presidential priority authorization, giving him carte blanche to acquire whatever equipment his SEALs needed through whatever means necessary. The authorization was unprecedented. Boehm could now modify equipment, purchase weapons on the open market, and bypass traditional procurement channels with presidential backing. All 5 boards of inquiry were immediately dropped. The SEALs would have the tools they needed to become the force Boehm envisioned. Years later, Boehm would call this presidential intervention one of the most crucial moments in SEAL history. Without Kennedy's backing, the program might have been ended by bureaucratic infighting. Instead, it became the foundation for what would eventually become the world's most elite special operations force. With the president on their side, Boehm's SEALs were ready to be deployed. They were sent to different locations around the world to assess and train friendly countries' militaries, or at least that was the official story. While some found themselves in Korea and Vietnam, Boehm himself was posted to the Dominican Republic, where he was supposedly helping to train the local Navy and UDTs. CIA operatives on the island soon revealed that in reality, he'd been sent there to save the life of an anti-Castro Cuban who'd been working with the U.S. by neutralizing a double agent that spies believed planned to assassinate him. Though this was not the type of role Boehm had envisioned for the SEALs, he accepted that it was part and parcel of unconventional warfare in the Cold War era, and was ready to do whatever his country asked of him. After successfully completing this assignment, his next one would take him to Cuba itself. In late April 1962, a year after the Bay of Pigs disaster, and just months before the Cuban Missile Crisis would bring the world to the brink of nuclear war, President Kennedy needed critical intelligence about Cuban coastal defenses. The mission was as dangerous as it was simple. Swim to hostile shores, conduct reconnaissance, and return undetected. For Boehm's newly minted SEALs, it would be their first real test under enemy guns. On April 27th, Boehm led a 6-man team comprising 3 SEALs and 3 UDT sailors aboard the submarine USS Threadfin, bound for the heavily guarded coastline near Havana. The intelligence they gathered could determine whether future amphibious operations against Castro's regime would be feasible. Threadfin dropped the men at the designated point, and they began swimming toward the shore. However, barely had they entered the water when 2 Cuban Comar-class missile boats appeared at high speed, racing directly toward the area where Boehm's men were swimming. The SEALs dove as deep as possible to avoid detection, pressing themselves against the sea floor and listening to the thundering engines of the enemy patrol boats overhead. Despite this close call, as well as problems with one of the men's breathing apparatus that almost forced Boehm to abort the entire mission, the SEALs made it to land and methodically mapped approximately 2 miles of coastline, gathering crucial intelligence about beach gradients, obstacles, and defensive positions. After completing their mission, the SEALs successfully rendezvoused with the Threadfin and returned to base. While the reconnaissance revealed sobering news for American military planners, the beach was too steep for effective amphibious landings. It had proven that Kennedy's investment in these maritime warriors was justified. The SEALs could operate in the most dangerous environments and bring back intelligence that conventional forces could never obtain. Soon after completing their mission, a Navy commander arrived at the headquarters of Boehm's SEAL team. He told Boehm he had come to write medal recommendations for him and the other men who had gone with him to Cuba. However, when Boehm found out that he was to be recommended for a Silver Star and his men only Bronze Stars, he was insulted, insisting that they should all receive Silver Stars, as they had worked as a team. Even when the commander eventually agreed to put this suggestion forward, Boehm was so angry that he said that none of them should get medals, as they'd simply been doing what SEALs are supposed to do, and told the commander that what they really needed was properly functioning equipment instead. In the end, Boehm and his SEALs received neither their medals nor new equipment. However, despite his rebellious attitude, Roy Boehm had carved out a reputation for himself as a brilliant leader. He would now find himself with a different mission, on the other side of the globe. On November 4th, 1963, just over 2 weeks before President Kennedy was assassinated, Boehm arrived in South Vietnam to serve as an advisor to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam underwater demolition teams. Rather than stick to conventional UDT training focused on beach reconnaissance and underwater demolition, Boehm employed his South Vietnamese frogmen in roles they had never imagined, following the same vision he had for the U.S. Navy SEALs. Under his guidance, they conducted reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory, staged ambushes against Viet Cong forces, and launched raids that struck fear into the hearts of communist fighters. For his work in Vietnam, Boehm was awarded the Bronze Star. The citation states that he participated in 23 operations, including 9 that involved direct combat. It makes special mention of a January 1964 engagement in which Boehm led an amphibious assault on a Viet Cong-held island, overcoming enemy forces and destroying 6 loaded junks. However, Vietnam extracted its price. In late 1964, now age 40, Boehm was medically evacuated with viral hepatitis and a deformed kneecap. Yet even though his personal combat tour had ended, his career was far from over. He assisted in designing and implementing the Navy's first counterinsurgency course, earning him the Navy Achievement Medal for his innovative approach to training. The course incorporated lessons learned from his SEAL program and his Vietnam experience, preparing a new generation of naval officers for unconventional warfare. His next assignment would prove equally influential. Boehm was named head of the Navy's River Patrol Craft Division, where he developed tactical procedures and trained patrol boat river sailors for Operation Game Warden in Vietnam. Once again, Boehm was pioneering new forms of warfare, this time riverine operations that would become crucial to the American effort in the Mekong Delta. Meanwhile, the Navy SEALs that Boehm had helped to mold continued proving his vision throughout the war, establishing the template for modern special operations. Their nighttime raids through Vietnam's waterways would strike fear into the hearts of the Viet Cong, who would call them the men with green faces due to their camouflage face paint. By the end of the war, the SEALs had become the most highly decorated units for their size in Vietnam, earning 1 Medal of Honor, 2 Navy Crosses, 42 Silver Stars, and 402 Bronze Stars. Though 48 SEALs lost their lives in combat, it's estimated that they'd potentially slain as many as 2,000 enemy fighters. For a force that numbered only 8 platoons at its peak, this was an extraordinary combat record that validated everything Boehm believed about small elite units. On August 1, 1971, Lieutenant Commander Roy Boehm retired from the Navy after 30 years of service. He'd enlisted as a 17-year-old diver and was leaving as the founding father of America's most elite Special Operations Force. In retirement, he became a pilot and powered paraglider enthusiast, always seeking new challenges and adventures. Roy Boehm passed away on December 30, 2008, at his home in Punta Gorda, Florida. He was 84 years old. True to his character, according to his wife Susan, quote, "He wanted no obituary, no funeral service, and no fanfare. He just wanted to go in peace." His legacy lives on through the Navy SEALs and the values he held until the end. Richard Marcinko, who served under Boehm and went on to become a SEAL commander himself, wrote of him, quote, "He always performed the mission first and doggedly looked out for the welfare of his men. His only standing order was that you pass on all you can to those who care to learn."